So I wanted to start today. Obviously, everyone is aware that New York State released new guidance for us very late on Friday afternoon. I think it was just after 5. And so we have spent the majority of the weekend reading the document, processing the document, and meeting together. We've met as superintendent groups multiple times just to ensure that we were understanding things accurately and also just thinking about the overall impact that this would have. The first thing I would say is that I think our hope was that the intent of new guidance was to help us open more fully. I think that was what our hope was. Ultimately, when reading through the guidance, I don't believe that it is a document that's going to help us open up more fully. In fact, the way that I'm reading it and understanding it is it really feels more restrictive than really the initial DOH guidance. So I share that because that's some frustration. For many of us as superintendents, we announced to our communities last week because we had waited and waited and waited from the state for new guidance and finally had it and put out to our communities that we were moving forward in different ways, that we're going to be compliant with the old guidance. I'm one of them. I sent out a large communication, a community-wide communication on Wednesday saying that we were opening fully K-12. This new guidance basically now looks like it's preventing me from bringing back my secondaries. It does appear that I'll be able to get my K-5, my pre-K through 5 back fully, but my secondary, there are some challenges and barriers included in that guidance right now as it reads to me that will be a struggle in terms of bringing them back. So I share that I guess there's a lot of probably individual questions that many of you may have that I'd be happy to answer because there's over 100 changes to the document itself, to the initial document. Some of them more subtle than others. One of the big ones, very clearly the New York State Department of Health shifted responsibility. So they were very clear about the fact that they are not responsible. They will not be approving, nor will they be responding to us, which they haven't once this year. And then that the Monroe County Department of Health would be responsible for enforcement of our plans. And that's not super clear in terms of what that means. So with all that said, I'm thinking probably the best way to go about it is just to answer some questions that you may have more universally. I think one thing I'll say also to start with is, generally speaking, the narrative or what I've heard out there is people's understanding that it's CDC guidance and that there was this shift from 6 feet to 3 feet, which is true collectively in terms of the way that's written. What's not real clear to people is that is linked with the community transmission. So because of our rate in the county right now, that puts, for example, Greece in a red zone, which is when there's difference in terms of if we're in a red zone with high community transmission, there's a different set of rules almost for elementary and secondary. And that is where when you get into the guidance details of it that make it difficult and make that difference in terms of how we're treating elementary and secondary. But we haven't linked opening to transmission rates in the past. And I guess my other point, and then I promise to stop, it's a bit of a rant. We've proven that we can be open and do this well. So our schools have done an incredible job of opening. Our schools have done an incredible job of staying open this year. Even when our rates went up in the community and we proved through testing, our positivity rate in schools was low. Our transmission within schools is almost non-existent. So it really doesn't make sense to me that we're now attaching our ability to do this to transmission rate because we haven't done that in the past. And we've also proven that within schools, because of the mitigation that we're doing, we've been able to avoid transmission and infection rates going up. So that's part of my frustration in all of this. And I was really hoping that there was true intent by the state to allow us some flexibility in order to open more fully in an easier way, but also a safe way for our kids. So with that, I'll be quiet.
It looks like a lot of the guidance, or as you mentioned, much of the I guess enforcement now falls to the county. Have you had any conversations over the weekend with Dr. Mendoza or his team about what his plan moving forward will be, and if there are any sort of testing mechanisms that perhaps can be used to further open those secondary grades?
Yeah, great, good question. Yes, we didn't talk to Dr. Mendoza this weekend, but we met collectively as superintendents. We generated a list of questions that we have, and then have shared that with him. So I know he responded saying that he was going to be working on that and getting back to us shortly in terms of answering some of that. So some of it is just asking, like, what does that enforcement look like? And then the other question that we do have is, are there any means, so I use an example, are there any means to pilot things that might be outside of the guidance in an effort to get our kids back more fully? So your example about testing is a good one, in that if I can test kids weekly and prove that our rate is really low, and that transmission through contact tracing and everything else that we're doing isn't happening in schools, is that a way that we would be able to open more fully? That is a question that we have out there, and one that we want to explore. I'm not sure in terms of where the county and Dr. Mendoza will stand on that related to their role in enforcement. And does their role in enforcement have to be so staunchly connected to exactly what the DOH New York State is about, or can they approve things like outside of that? So I think that's a big question.
Would you be able to offer some specifics as for what has you most frustrated with this newly edited list of ideas that would allow, or seemingly allow, for reopenings to take place? You spoke about the red zone. You spoke about transmission being something different. Other aspects of this that seem to be really negating any attempt by the states to offer this to you.
Yeah, I think, and I'm speaking for myself when I say this, but I certainly don't think I'm alone in my thinking. I'm frustrated by the timing. I'm frustrated that we have reached out to the state over and over again throughout this entire year. That initial guidance was designed and given to us in August of 2020. And as the science changed this year, as we learned more, as we proved more in terms of the success we were having with having kids in school and knowing how important to get them back in school, nothing changed. And then to drop this Friday at 5 o'clock is just insulting. And once again, really, really frustrating to us, because it's not looser in any way. There isn't the flexibility, I believe. I think there's some places where there's some flexibility in terms of some of the language shifting a little bit. But by and large, that one piece related to the transmission rate is going to be a key piece to holding us back. So I think that's my biggest frustration. And I guess when you look at the idea that we have thoughts around how to safely do this, we've proven we can do it, and we've also got ideas, I'd like the flexibility to be able to do that with some confidence, because I think our communities want this. Our families, 90% of them have said they want their kids back more fully, 4 days a week. And I don't think my community is completely unique, but they feel confident in what we've been doing.
And just as a quick follow-up, as we head into mid-April here, it seems like we're running out of time to even give a try to anything that might even be beneficial as you approach September. Would you tell your district that at this point, it's really not going to get any better?
So I'm not there yet. And maybe that's just, I'm not willing to call it yet, because we do have questions out there, and there's ways that I'm looking at this that I'm really not willing to give up quite yet. But, we as superintendents weigh the struggle of that, because we also have community members that they're planning their lives around our decisions. So if something's going to change for them, they need to know now, based so that they can structure their childcare, all their decision making. So I want to hang on just a little bit longer, but we're all going to be forced to make a decision soon, in the next week or so, around what this is going to look like going forward for the fourth quarter. And then obviously, if transmission rates were to come down, in an ideal world, that would allow us to bring kids back. But You know, that piece, you know, at what point is that even helpful for people? If I bring people back or kids back the second week in June, you know, I don't know that that's super helpful for anybody. So I think that's, you know, we're weighing those decisions right now as far as, and some of it's going to be based on some of the answers that we get.
Also based on that transmission rate piece.
Can you just, I'm not sure who's on iPhone 3, but can they mute their line, please? Sorry, go ahead, Kayla.
No problem. That transmission rate piece, just kind of what you were just saying, just about if the transmission rate does go down and then you come back, is there a concern that then it goes back up and then you have to shut down again? I mean, is that kind of part of the unsureness of even going back right now?
Yeah. I mean, that is, we don't know. I mean, and we've shifted and gone up and down. So to me, that's why, I personally don't like that measure because we have seen changes throughout the year. And I think what we have seen is consistently schools have been able to be safe places. So I guess that's my struggle with tying it to that. And then again, it doesn't give much clarity in the guidance around what happens if you do start and you creep up. The other thing that it's not real clear about is what defines your community? Are we talking about transmission rates in my zip code? Are we talking about transmission rates in the county? Are we talking about transmission rates? Like how granular are we getting or not? And I'm not sure because you could have some places and districts where the transmission rate might be okay, but if you're clumped into Monroe County right now, you're being labeled as higher.
I'm also curious if that infection rate piece, you know, say it does go down or say it wasn't even part of this. I know there's also a guideline related to the cohort sizes. Would Greece be able to do that if the transmission rate was lower, or would that even work out the way you have it structured?
Yeah, that's one of the questions that we have is around the definition of cohorting. They give more clarity and they use an elementary example because that's, I think, easiest to imagine. So a cohort being a group, you know, a third grade classroom, they typically stay together all day. That's kind of easy to imagine. We're looking for some flexibility in terms of the definition for that. And that's one of the questions that we've got out there is, can we define that a little differently?
Kathy, what about, this has always been something you've brought up in all your counterparts, transportation. How does these new guidelines even further impact that? Is that even possible with the set of guidelines they've given you? Yeah,
so transportation and food, or like meals, are two pieces that really read and create challenge for us. I think we have a little bit of freedom because of some of the language that's providing in there in terms of when possible and shoulds. So I don't feel like transportation would be the thing that would completely hold me up, though I don't love the language. The food piece in terms of meals, and this I'll use this as an example because it's my example specifically. They talk about lunches and the fact that when eating, kids need to be 6 feet apart. Now, we haven't done that all year long. So that now you talk about frustrating. So all year long, we have used barriers in our cafeteria because that was an okay thing to do given the New York State guidance. So, and all year long, we've had not one transmission in our lunchroom where we've been below 6 feet using barriers. And I get that there's science behind the barriers and I don't want to discount that. I'm not the researcher as part of that. I will say though, from a model perspective, it's worked for us. And now as you read this new guidance, it says 6 feet and it says that they're not really counting barriers anymore, but I'm not quite sure. Does that mean they're not recommended, but do they count? And can we still continue in the same model that we have? Because that's another piece that matters when you're trying to bring big groups of kids back. And we do feed them every day. So that is something that is a problem in the way that it's written. And that language with meals sounds stricter to me. So that's one of the things we're working on right now.
You just brought up barriers. I'm wondering, I know a lot of districts have purchased hundreds of if not thousands of barriers in an effort to try and get kids back. you are just using them in school, in lunchrooms? I mean, was there any, did you order any plastic barriers? And
I did.
You did.
I did.
How many? What was that cost, and where will that come?
Well, and that was based on a meeting that had happened a few weeks ago with our county executive, who had mentioned that they supported the use of barriers and that they also would, from the county, help with the cost of those. So that was public. And that also sort of just gave many of us the idea that, like, all right, let's go and let's just do this because we need our kids back. So we're looking, obviously we have some funds, federal funds, but we're also looking for county funds to help with the support of that. Many, I think, over the weekend may have canceled orders. So, you know, I don't know exact cost, but I know there were several districts that did order that because we saw that as the pathway to open, and the only pathway to open. Now, the other thing I would mention, which is I think an interesting point, is you have hundreds of schools in this state right now that are open using barriers. And they're open, and they're probably many of them that are in high rates or the red zone, according to the new guidance. Are they going to be expected to go back to a hybrid setting now? So even my husband, who's a teacher, I think their county is also in a red zone. He teaches 8th grade. Does he have to now go back to a hybrid model? They just started with barriers probably 3 weeks ago. So that's a question that I know is out there across the state because many districts, and again, we've proven in a lot of these cases that the rates are low, transmission is next to nothing. So can we just continue with the plans that we had or had been using already? So that's a question that we do have out there. I don't have any answer to that.
Kathy, many districts.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kayla. Go ahead.
Okay. In terms of reopening for the elementary age, I mean, is that definitely happening, and is that happening soon? I mean, what are the plans for that?
Yeah, most of us, I don't want to speak for everybody, but there was a lot of us, some districts already have their K-5 or K-6 back. So this is less of an issue. This new guidance is less of an issue for them. But the districts I know that were really active and working towards getting their K-5s back or K-6s are still actively working on that. Like I know Hilton announced yesterday, that was public, that they're continuing their plan. They're going to bring their K-6 back. I don't know the exact date, if it was the 22nd or the 19th, but one of those days. I know we're planning, like, to me, my message last week said we're bringing K-12 back. So I need to get out to my community and assure them that, yes, we're still moving forward with our elementary, our secondary. I don't want people to give up. I'm not ready to give up yet and say that that's not happening. I just have some unanswered questions still because we just got this on Friday before I can really communicate clearly to our secondary folks if that would be able to happen. But I do know that of the districts that I know of, they're still really actively working and moving forward with the elementaries.
Yeah, Kathy, this is kind of a follow-up to that, but 1 week from today is April 19th. We spoke a month ago, and that was your target date. You said we are planning for April 19th. Many other districts planning for, if not the 19th, the week of the 19th. So what has anything changed now as you guys were planning to open and do this on the 19th, and then you get these guidelines on Friday? What has changed, if anything?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge right now is, so going back to those zones and now that bigger shift for my secondary. So that's one of the big changes. In terms of the target date, the target date hasn't changed for us. With the elementaries, the biggest challenge is going to be us. We're going to sort through and work through the lunch pieces and some of the details that are written in that guidance that we want to make sure are compliant. But I don't see that changing for that. So I just see it's an extra layer of work to kind of now move through. And depending on the answer we get, it could change a lot in terms of the work that goes into how do we feed kids every day. You've got hundreds of kids in schools, which is it's an operational piece that matters oftentimes in terms of whether schools can or can't open. I'm going to say out loud, that will not be a barrier. We'll figure it out. We are going to figure it out to be able to get our elementary back. But I also want my secondary back. And I want to work on a specific plan that would allow for that.
And I know you're working hard to make sure you get those answers quick, but with a week to go, are you hopeful for literally any day, today, tomorrow, but definitely by the end of the week, of course?
Yeah, we sent our list of questions, which many of those are like factors in terms of then what we can or can't do. So I'm hopeful. We have a standing call on Tuesdays, so I'm hoping that we can get some answers before our call or at our call tomorrow at noon. And then with the idea that, I can't keep my families also hanging forever. So, I'm hoping to be able to get some communication clearly to all of our families by mid to the end of the week, with the hope of still using the 19th.
Kathy, it seems like the state has completely punted any responsibility for enforcing any of this from here on out to the counties. So do you feel like you're sort of at the mercy of whatever Dr. Mendoza and Adam Bello come up with or are okay with?
Yeah, the frustrating part about that is, yes, that's exactly the word I used this weekend too, is they've punted it. So they've punted it, but then the other piece about that, and this is, I think, the frustrating piece for us and for our communities is, we keep talking about this idea of like finger pointing because, the governor says superintendents can open and the governor says it's up to local areas. But what isn't shared there is the DOH is also, I'm sure, expecting the county to follow that specific guidance to a T. So do they really have I don't know. This is the question that we have is there any latitude in terms of the enforcement? Is there any latitude in terms of our plans and the way that they're written with our local health department in terms of them? And it's clear in there that it doesn't say that they approve our plans. It says that they enforce the implementation of our plan. So I think what's frustrating is it's sort of that finger pointing piece again, because to say that it's up to the local health departments, but then to also maybe not mention the fact that there is still that expectation that it's exactly, that they can't approve anything outside of that. I don't know if that's the case or not.
Kathy, this is admittedly less important, but worth asking. Prom coming up soon. Any guidance on if or how you guys can do that?
We're using just the regular guidance that has been given to our communities in terms of gatherings. So everybody's moving forward with plans. I know that we talked a little bit about this at one of our last meetings in terms of the way that looks in different districts. Some doing more traditional things because they've got smaller numbers of kids. Some using bigger venues and sort of different formats. There's a lot of variation there, but we're still building those using those requirements that have been given around all activities like weddings, etc.
Same with graduation plans, I'm guessing as well.
Mm-hmm.
I have an off-topic question. Well, sort of off-topic. I'm wondering, state assessments are next week. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so could you kind of walk me through, if you're a remote student, you don't have to take them. If you're in person, you do. How is this all working?
So I'll start by saying we were really disappointed that our request to not do the testing was denied. So we really worked hard to advocate for not doing that, and then gathered additional data, shared that to only get sort of denied again. I think the struggle with state testing is families can also choose not to have their children take it. So you have remote learners and people who aren't going to be participating. And then you also have many kids who are going to come in and also not participate because they can. So it just leaves for a struggle in terms of really what is our participation going to look like? And then what does that mean in terms of what we do with that data? Is it going to be helpful at all? So at a time when, for me, instructional time is so crucial. And when I say I'm desperate to get our kids back, I want more time on task. I want more time with kids reading and writing and getting the work that they need. Taking a test doesn't really fit in that category for me in terms of a loved activity. So we're going to waste time on that with the idea of then how are we even going to use that in really beneficial, helpful ways. In some years, we can use that in programmatic ways in terms of how we assess things. What do we know about our schools or learners in general? I feel like we're set up, it's just going to be a wash this year in terms of we're complying because it's a state mandate. and we're going to have to, but I don't know that many districts are going to get much really valuable out of that.
Are you already hearing from parents who don't want their kids to participate?
We hear about it every year, and we'll get that right up until that day. What will happen, there'll be more and more that'll come in now, but right up until that day, you'll have kids come in with notes saying that they're not participating. And we have to allow for that.
Kathy, you mentioned you were interested in perhaps offering a pilot program for the testing. Is there anything else that you would like to give a run, just even if it's for the fall, as a way to perhaps test your district's ability to manage this as the pandemic fades?
Yeah, I think so. For me, that was where the last 10 weeks of school was. It was such a perfect chunk of time, and that we had one quarter. And what we were, I mean, when you look at our plans in terms of like overall, they're solid plans. So I wouldn't change a lot about the way that we've done our cleaning, the way that our procedures and things like that. I would add testing, because I feel like testing just proves, once again, it gives us another indicator on a regular basis around what's happening in our schools with our kids and what's happening possibly with transmission. So I would want to really just follow that and see, and it would tell us. So if we did see a spike, we would learn something from that. We could learn what happened, why that happened, and then make adjustments for the fall. Because, you know, as we go forward in the fall, we're still going to have many of these things. COVID's not going away. So it would give us time to at least test out some of that. That was my hope in terms of being able to do something a little bit different right now, and testing being the major mechanism with that. I think there are some other ideas that different folks might have related to cohorting that could be considered a little bit different and unique, that maybe we could learn from as well. Those are the main things I think that we could play around with.
What would you say to families out there and parents who have also been waiting for this guidance, and we're kind of thinking that, you know, all their students might be going back soon, all their kids, and as you said, there seems to be maybe a little bit of a misconception, people hearing it's 3 feet now, but there's a lot more to it. So maybe what would you say to them who are out there like also disappointed?
Yeah, I use the example, my husband is an educator and is married to me. We spend a lot of time together, and it's funny because he has struggled to understand throughout this who's making what decision, why, and like the misunderstanding of 3 to 6 and the misunderstanding of that. Like, so I would, I mean, I just have great empathy, and I'm sorry. Like I don't know that we could work harder at trying to get people to speak from the state perspective or do this earlier. We started early. We've been advocating all along. Many of our communities have helped with that. Like we had many folks from Greece write letters to the state, the DOH, demanding guidance, etc. So I understand their frustration, and I feel their frustration, because I recognize and agree with the fact that our kids need to be back, and particularly our secondary kids, because I know things are looking better for the elementary at this point. But for me, you know, if I have an 8th grader that I'm worried about and that hasn't thrived in this setting, I'm desperate as a parent right now to get them back. 6th grader, you know, like, but those parents are desperate, and I want to deliver on that. Like I want them. And I also know I can do it safely. So, and I think that's the rub, and that's the frustration. So I do recognize that and appreciate that.
I want to circle back one more time on the testing. What do you think will be a fair assessment of how detrimental this year has been to students, and when do you think that's fair to do it?
Yeah, so to go back to state testing. So state testing is one piece. And I'm not saying that you can never get anything from that, but I don't think it's going to be the thing that we really anchor into in terms of figuring out our kids in terms of learning loss, et cetera. I know we've started to have conversations connected to the budget right now and some of the stimulus money around what can we do? So how do we engage teachers? And that was, again, my point to go back to the 4th quarter is my hope, and I was really excited about the idea of having our kids back for 4th quarter so that we could get a better assessment around what exactly they've lost, or what exactly they haven't lost, because in some cases maybe we've assumed some things, and as we get them back in school, and as we use we have a lot of internal assessments and ways that we check for kids in terms of their understanding and mastery of standards. But the whole idea of fourth quarter was that was going to actually position us in a better place for really understanding where our kids were at, so that we could then also design programs for the summer and programs for the fall to help close those gaps. So I would say it still matters in terms of, I put teachers first. Teachers know kids, and teachers also know their content and skills and what kids really need to know. So when they get them and have them in front of them, they're going to be able to tell us what are the key things that really need ramping up, what are the essential things that they're missing. And they also have really good ideas in terms of how to catch kids up if we ask them and if we include them, which is, I think, going to be a key part. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Happy Monday.
You too.
Thank you.